I'd like to welcome everybody to this fantastic seminar on how to effectively counter sales objections. And let's go ahead and advance the slide here. All right, there we go. So I am, of course, my name is Steven Sidnor. Sorry about that, folks. Let me get back to the slide there. And of course, I am an author and a trainer and a coach. I have been doing business development for people like yourself for over 17 years. I've been in sales and marketing for almost all of my career. And a couple of books that I thought you'd be interested in. The first two on the right are the book and the companion workbook, and it's called Survive or Thrive, Creating the Life You Want Out of the Life You Have. And this is just a fantastic self-help book that will help guide you through life challenges to get you out of that surviving mode and into a more thrive down lifestyle. And my latest book, which is the subject of our webinar today, is 32 Sales Objections Easily Countered. And this is a quick and easy guide to countering most of the common objections, stalls, and pushbacks that you're going to hear in the marketplace, all 32 of them. The first book actually gets in some of the material that we're going to talk about today, and then it's a good field book that's going to guide you in a particular objection. It'll tell you what to say, what not to say, and then some suggestions and tips around the particular objections. So just a couple more things here as we switch the screens here. I am an expert in helping people build their business, and I have a business builder series that you may be interested in. In the business builder series, there's really 5 core competencies and skills that if you want to skyrocket your sales, you got to know how to do these well. The first one is you need to know a couple of things before your first sales meeting. There are a lot of challenges today. The national average is 80% of first initial meetings, fail to produce any results. And so this is an introduction that will actually soon be on this platform, working on that right now. And then the 2-meeting close product actually gets into how do you effectively conduct your initial sales meetings with sales leaders on the C particular level, and then how do you bring that back in to create a winning proposal. Those are the first 2 most important meetings. Your first meeting, which is the initial meeting, your second meeting, proposal meeting. Any meeting that happens in between that is just supporting those 2. But what I find is that people in business don't effectively conduct a really, really effective sales meeting, and so that will be available too. And of course, how to negotiate, not discount. That's a skill set that every salesperson needs to know. And our today's topic, which is how to effectively handle sales objections and other things like creating goals and setting priorities. These are things that if you're in sales, if you're in business, if you're responsible for generating revenue, these are core skill sets that every salesperson needs to know how to do. So, and there's some information on that if you want to know how to get a hold of me later. So, hey, let's jump into our topic today. So I'm going to start off with a couple of really interesting stories. Have you ever used this objection? Is this the best price that I can get? Maybe it's been used on you if you're selling your goods and services, either business to resident, retail, or business to business. So in creating this content, creating my book, I decided that I was going to go into the marketplace and just simply ask this question and see how many people could give me the appropriate response. So the first one is I have a particular coffee shop that I visit, Starbucks in my local area. And I know you don't think this is crazy. If you've been to a Starbucks, you know that early in the morning there's probably a long line out there. So here's what I did. So I go in. I don't like to go through the drive-thru because I think it takes too long. I like to meet and greet people. So I'm standing in line. And as I'm standing there, I thought, you know, I'm going to ask this barista before she rings up my coffee. Now, you got to keep in mind that a cup of coffee, when I was putting this content together, was about, you know, around $1.52, okay, just for black coffee. And so as I'm standing in line, I thought, you know, I'm going to ask this person this question. And I have to tell you what, there's a long line of people behind me. And I thought, at first, I thought, you know what, maybe I shouldn't do this. They're going to think I'm kind of crazy. So anyway, I decided I'm going to do it anyway on my own field test. So I get up to the counter. The barista says, "What, you know, can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'd like to have a tall, which is a small cup of coffee. And I said, hey, before you ring this up, I got a question for you. And she said, what is it? And I said, is this the best price that I can get? Now keep in mind, the cost of this coffee is $1.52. As soon as I said that, the people behind me were like looking at me like I was some crazy guy that just walked in and grabbed a cup of coffee. And everything went silent. What was interesting is the barista looked right at me and said, could you say that again? And I said, well, I just want to know if this is the best price I can get. And without saying a word, she turned around, went back through the double doors, and came out with the store manager. And the manager came up and said, hey, sir, can I help you? And I said, I just wanted to know if this was the best price I could get. He looked at me and he said, are you kidding me? And I said, no, I just want to know if this is the best price I can get. Folks, he was so alarmed and concerned and stumped by that question. He just looked at me and said, here, you can have a free cup of coffee. So I walked out of there with a free cup of coffee. Now, of course, I'm not sure what happened with everybody else who's in line, but you're not going to believe this. I went back to that same coffee shop the next day, stood in line, different barista, and I asked this barista at the same coffee shop the same question. She's ringing up my coffee, and I said, is this the best price I can get before you ring it up? And she said the same thing. I'm not sure what you're asking. I just said, is this the best price I can get? She goes back through the double doors, gets the store manager, comes out, and folks, it's the same store manager. Of course, it's been 24 hours since I was back in there. You know what he does? I asked him. He said, hey, he said, can I help you here? And I said, yeah, I just want to know if this is the best price I can get on this cup of coffee. He looked at me and he goes, I can't believe you're back again. Of course, what's interesting is that I visit that Starbucks probably, 4 times a week in meetings and stuff like that. But here's the point. The point is that both of them, that 3 people, didn't know how to counter this particular objection. And this is what we do in the marketplace, isn't it? We get hit with an objection from a particular client or a prospect at any point in the sales cycle, and we're not sure how to answer, so we just kind of say anything. Here's another example. Went to Walmart. I needed to get 12 steaks for a barbecue that I was doing. I load up 12 steaks in a shopping cart, and I see a couple of ladies there with a competitor newspaper. I don't know what it said, but I know they were talking about, they're in the meat section. And so when I went up to the Walmart cashier, before she rang it up, I said, hey, before you ring this up, can I ask you a question? She said, what is it? I said, is this the best price I can get on these steaks? And she looked at me. She said, well, what were you thinking? And I just said, well, I saw a newspaper from your competitor in the meat section. I'm not really sure what the discount was, but how about 50%? And I said 50% because she asked me. And she looked at me and she said, okay. And she immediately rang up 50%. Now, this is interesting in the marketplace because this is kind of what we do. We don't know how to handle objections, so we do 2 things. We either give the wrong answer or we discount our prices and services. And I'm going to show you in this webinar today, I'm glad you're joining, I'm going to show you an easy technique to handle customer objections. And I'm going to show you in a way that's different than some of the techniques that are taught. And I'm going to go over some of the most popular techniques for handling customer objections. And then in today's webinar, I'm going to give you the best, the most recommended technique for handling objections that will almost diffuse anybody. So this is an objection handling definition that's just standard in the industry. It says you handle sales objections by addressing your prospect's concerns about your product or service in order to create a technical, organizational, and personal buy-in. Now, pause right there. If you downloaded the outline or this PowerPoint presentation that's on your system there, I can actually see that, how to effectively counter sales objections in Adobe. If you want to download that, if you already did, I want you to circle customer, your prospect's concerns, and then personal buy-in. Those are the 2 things that I want you to focus on. Because when your prospect or somebody hits you with an objection, there is a concern that you need to get to or the real truth of why they're objecting. And so in this webinar, those are the 2 main things that we're going to be focusing on. But as we do that, there is a consequence of poorly handling sales objections, isn't there? There's a quote that says, "Nothing defeats an inexperienced salesperson faster than an unexpected objection." And you know what? Sales objections not only show up on the sales end, but don't they show up on the customer service end if you're doing retention sales? If you're even having a conversation with a coworker or maybe a family member, they're going to object to maybe something that you said. So this technique that I'm going to be teaching you is not just for sales objections, although that's our main topic for the day. It's also going to help you handle the objections of other people in other departments, such as retention or just a coworker or maybe even a family member. And it's a technique that I highly recommend because it works. So what's the consequence of handling poor objections? Well, first of all, if you're prospecting and you have your initiatives, you're making phone calls, and you are trying to set up and book meetings, you're going to get objections from people that you're trying to set up a meeting with, aren't you? And if we don't handle those properly, then we have to make a lot more phone calls in order to set up a lot more meetings. So understanding how to handle poor objections well, well, it simply means you can call less people and create more meetings. Look at the second one. Initial sales meetings. A lot of people, in order to create revenue for their company, you've got to meet with somebody. They're either meeting with somebody on the phone, or they're meeting somebody over like a go-to meeting, or they're meeting somebody in person. And as soon as you're meeting somebody, you know, your goal is to convince them to convince themselves in order to buy your products and services, and you can expect pushback. You're going to expect a different opinion. Proposal presentations. This is where we see a lot of objections. Also, sales pipeline is going to affect your sales pipeline if you're not handling objections well. It's going to affect your future revenues for your company. On average, when we improve the skill set of how to handle objections on a sales team or a sales retention team, they can expect an immediate 20 to 25% return on their investment. Why is that? Because they're having a better conversation in order to minimize the impact of handling customer objections. And of course, it also affects your personal income, doesn't it? Because if you're handling these objections well, your income is simply going to go up. That's why when I'm talking to my students or people that go through my seminars, that I will promise if you do what I tell you to do, and I'll show you the process works, it's been proven, it's going to improve your personal income. So, how about this question? Why do we get resistance from people when we're prospecting or selling or making a proposal presentation? Why do people push back? Why do you push back when somebody calls you up, say an insurance person calls you up out of the blue and they want to meet with you? Well, there's a reason why you're pushing back, and that's one of the things that we want to look at. So, there's a lot of reason that people push back when we get certain resistance to objections, and here's a couple of them. So why do we get objections? Well, here's the first one. It may be simply because there's a lack of knowledge. For instance, if we don't need a mobile solution, then why would you want to get educated on a mobile solution? Because you see, some people just have a lack of knowledge. That's why they object to you or to your phone call or to what you're doing. Here's the second one. It may be a specific warranted concern, like your price is higher than everyone else's. You've probably been on that end, haven't you? I know that I have. And when I get 3 bids, for instance, if I'm getting my house painted, you know, I'll go out and get 3 proposals, and those prices that come back, you know, you got the lowest one, the middle one, and the highest one, and it causes you concern as to what exactly is going on. And so there's a warranted concern from the individual you're talking to. Do they always tell you that? I don't think so. Do they tell you that they have a lack of knowledge? I don't think so. So you have to be able to address those objections to get them to share which one of these is this that they're dealing with. Look at the third one. It may represent a hidden agenda. For instance, the customer has a preference or incentive to use a different product but doesn't say that outright. You know, a lot of the objections that you hear, I think some of the first objections really aren't what the real issue is. So if you can handle an objection to get them to explain what the real issue is or minimize what they're thinking so they're listening to you, that would be very helpful, wouldn't it? Here's another reason that we get objections. It could be that it's a perception issue. You know, folks, the cloud technology that's becoming available. I do a lot of work in the technology arena, maybe you, but probably all of us that are on this webinar are familiar with cloud services. I know that when I am doing Amazon or Google or some of the things on my phone, it's asking me, hey, you know what, you need more cloud storage. Honestly, I don't have a clue. A cloud to me is a thing that's floating around in the sky. I don't really know what's going on behind there, only it simply means that it's simply a hard drive on a server somewhere in the world, and it's calling it a cloud. Well, you know, people have a perception issue. They're not sure what the cloud is. They're not sure if it's secure. So the last one is maybe they're just not clear about their interests, because you've probably heard that that's not a priority for me this year. And what does that signal? Signals that it's not, you don't have my interest, you don't have my attention, because it's not something that I'm really concerned about. So those are some of the top reasons, why we get objections. Here's another reason. This is probably one of the biggest sales problems that you have, and you need to realize that when you step into the world of sales and you step in front of the customer or you're making phone calls, there's a sales problem. Now you can see the picture there that there's a girl pushing away a particular guy. Now let's say they are a boyfriend and girlfriend. So why do you think she's pushing him away? Well, obviously it looks like that he's trying to kiss her, isn't it? Well, the reason that she's actually pushing him away is because this individual has got bad breath. Now, I don't know about you, but when you're speaking with somebody that has bad breath, what is your first reaction to that? Are you going to tell them, hey, you know what, you got bad breath, you need a mint? Well, you might if it was maybe a spouse or a significant other, but for most of us, if we're sitting or talking to somebody that has bad breath, the only thing we're thinking about is getting away, minimizing the conversation, cutting the conversation short, shortening the meeting, and simply getting away. So what's the point that we're trying to make here? Well, the point is this. Prospects don't want to talk to a salesperson because to them, salespeople have bad breath. And that's one of the major reasons why people are going to push back on you is because of the bad breath problem. Besides some of the things that we already talked about, I think this is a huge obstacle that salespeople don't realize, that as soon as you sit down with somebody or call somebody, people in general don't want to meet with a salesperson. Now, can you relate to that? I know I can. In fact, let's do an acid test. So here's our acid test, folks. You can see the picture of Macy's department store that's currently right there on the screen. You see the girl next to the picture of Macy's, and she's got her hand out, like don't talk to the hand. Now here's what's going on. You're walking into Macy's for a number of reasons. Of course, the holidays are coming around the corner, and you may be going in a department store to just browse or look, or maybe there's something that you really want. As soon as you walk through this door, who do you see coming at you? Well, of course, you're going to see a store clerk coming towards you. What is the first thing that you're thinking before you walk in there? Well, I know what I'm thinking. Every time I go in there, I know somebody is going to try to get my attention and redirect me. They're going to come up to me and they're going to say, hey, can I help you? And of course, your hand's already out. If it's not out, it's out on the inside. And you already have your answer, don't you? And your answer is simply, hey, I'm looking. You know what I tell people when I do that? When they come up to me, I just say, hey, I'm waiting on my spouse, and I'm browsing. I'm just looking around. She's shopping for something. Or I'm not coming to the store. I'm just going to the store to something else. And you know what? It's not necessarily true. I'm in there looking for maybe some discounts for a dress shirt, or maybe a Christmas gift or a birthday gift or an anniversary gift, but I'm not going to tell them that. I'm just going to get them away. And there's a reason why we do that. So when we're overcoming objections, the first thing that you have to realize is that people are suspicious of salespeople. That's the acid test, isn't it? You can relate to that. I think everybody can. Is that you don't want somebody to call you. If somebody called you while you're driving home tonight or driving in the morning to work or just any time during the day and said, hey, I'm Bill and I'm with a so-and-so company and The reason I'm calling is I want to meet with you to talk about your insurance needs, and you don't have any insurance needs, or at least you're not aware of it. What are you going to say? You're going to give them an objection. So objections, you have to remember, are just part of the job. So if they're part of the job, you need to anticipate that objections are coming. And so since you anticipate that they're coming, guess what? Let's get good at handling objections, because they're not that difficult. And here's a couple of things in overcoming initial objections I thought we could look at. First of all, you see the two guys that are arm wrestling. When you come in contact with somebody who wants to change your schedule, tell you how to spend your money, or at least that's your perception, or a salesperson, salespeople have a way of arm wrestling prospects, or that's what it feels like to a prospect. So one of the questions you have to ask to handle initial objection is, how do you feel about objections? Or how does the prospect feel about objections? Let's start with that first question. When you're walking in a Macy's department store, whether you realize it or not, there's something that you're feeling, or you wouldn't be concerned about somebody coming up to you asking for directions. Now, I just use that example. Not everybody is going to be mean and rude to a Macy's sales clerk. But the point is that think about this. There's an emotion attached to every objection. Okay? How does the prospect feel about objections? Well, there's a lot going on inside of them, and there's an emotion that they're feeling when they're handling or pushing back on an objection. Now, it's important to remember that, because we're going to pick this back up and just later on in our webinar. Techniques for counting sales objections. Here are a couple of techniques that actually have been used a lot in the sales world, and so I wanted to cover a couple of these with you. The first technique for countering sales objections is called feel, felt, found. Now hang on. You've probably heard this before, haven't you? If you've been selling for a while, if you've been through consultative selling, sales training, or handling objections, you've probably heard about this technique. It's called feel, felt, found. And basically you're saying, hey, I know how you feel, and I felt the same way. However, we have found and ... Now, here's what I'm saying about feel, felt, found. And maybe you're using it, but I want to put up a yield sign, okay? Not literally, but as we go to the next screen. I think feel, felt, found is obsolete. In fact, I think it's been used so much that it's a technique that just doesn't work anymore. And besides, does the client or the prospect that you're talking to, do they really know that you identify with how they feel? And just because you felt the same way, how do you prove that? And then you kind of reposition the sale with what you found. It doesn't really sound relational, does it? It doesn't really sound sincere. What it does sound is it just sounds technique. So this is the one technique that I would say, if you're using this technique and if it worked for you, keep doing it. However, I think it's been overused and over-abused. Now, you won't hear very many sales consultants that say that, but this is an area that I study. And then when I study people that use this and people that use a different technique, the other technique gets a larger percentage of results. So I think feel, felt, found is obsolete. Here's another one that I wanted to introduce, technique number 2. Now, I heard this technique because a door-to-door salesperson came to my door one day, and I picked up on this phrase that they were using every time I gave them an objection. And every time it did this, it kind of recentered me as to, oh, okay, why are you here? So somebody would say, hey, Step, I don't have time to meet with you next week. And you would say, well, that's why I'm calling. Or somebody would say, hey, Step, I'm already under contract, and so I don't think we need what you're having to offer. And then you say, well, that's why I'm calling. Or maybe you're in a proposal and they say, I think your price is just a little too high. And you can say, well, that's why I'm addressing this. And that's why I am ... is a great line to use, because it causes the person to kind of rethink as to, well, why are you here, or why are you calling? One of my friends uses this a lot. He's in the web development business, and I've heard him call people on the phone, and somebody says, well, we already have a website. And he says, well, that's why I'm calling. And then he'll reposition what he's saying. Now, I like this. It's not my number one technique, but it's easy to use. The challenge with this is you better tell them that's why you're calling. So you have to do a good follow-up after that for a reposition. But it works, so it's something that I would give a kind of a stamp of approval on. But the technique that I want to spend the majority of the time showing you is a technique. It's fresh, it's different, it's relational. It connects with people, and it makes you a consultant, partner, problem solver. It makes you a real person that's really concerned about what they're objecting to first. And it's called the either-or statement. This is the best technique that I believe for countering objections in almost every case. It's a little different. It does take a little bit of work, but I'm going to break it down for you so we can unpack it. So at the end of this webinar, you'll know exactly how this works. So let's just jump right into that. So, common initial objections that we all hear. Now in my book, I have 32 common objections, but we're just going to address about 4 of them here. So they are, is this the best price I can get? Remember that one? That was the Starbucks and the Walmart story. I'm under contract. That's an objection that a lot of people hear. Hey, we're all set. That's an objection that you hear when you're calling and trying to set up appointments. Have you heard this one? Hey, I need to run this by my management. Or if you're doing business to retail, hey, I need to run this by my spouse or my significant other. These are all the common objections, and as soon as people hear that, what a lot of salespeople do is they simply concede and go on about their business. And there's simply a better way to do that. So let's look at it. First of all, I want to show you the 4 steps for overcoming objections. Starting with acknowledge. Then you go to probe, position and respond, and confirm. Simple, isn't it? So acknowledge, meaning you want to prove your listing and diffuse any negativity. Probe, you want to ask a question to determine why the prospect objected and wait for the customer's response. Position and respond. Now, if you pulled this off the webinar here for the handout, you want to circle that because I'm going to show you what is happening with many sales objections and why they don't go anywhere and produce results. Because where we start objections is we acknowledge, kinda, and we drop down to position and respond. And when you do that, what happens is that you're not really handling the objection very well. But you've got acknowledge, probe, position, and respond, which is to tailor your response based on the prospect's answer to your questions. And you want to include relevant features, products, benefits, and financial impact. And then confirm. You know, does this meet the customer's need? You want to keep the dialogue inactive and try to make a second effort. Now, this is 4 parts to overcoming a customer objection. So, in the acknowledge, when you hear something like, hey, you know, I'm all set here. These are some of the common words that we use. We start with, hey, you know what, Step, I understand. Or, I apologize. Or we use the word but. Or we start off with I recognize or I'm sorry, and maybe some other words that you've probably used before. Well, you know what happens is this. When you tell somebody, if they were to say, you know what, I already have an insurance person that I'm using, and you go, hey, I understand, and then you say something like, you know, but a lot of our customers, I've heard that before, you know, felt that they were okay too, but then they found out that after meeting with me that there was a lot of different needs that they didn't have. Well, how's that sound? Does it really prove you understand when you say I understand? Well, absolutely not. Or I apologize. We say that, but how do we prove? How do we prove that you apologize? Or I recognize or I'm sorry. And what about that word but? I mean, imagine your spouse or your girlfriend or somebody like that, you know, buys a new dress and says, hey, how do you like my new dress? How do I look in it? And you go, hey, you look great, but you know what? You just killed anything that went before that. So here's the thing. If you're going to use I understand, I apologize, I recognize, or I'm sorry, you've got to complete the sentence. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So let's go to the next slide because we're not going to role play because we're on a webinar together. So here's what it looks like. Here's what's happening in probably many of the sales objections that happen right now. People making phone calls, people having meetings, objections coming towards their way, and they go, hey, I understand, I apologize, I'm sorry. They don't probe, they don't really prove they acknowledge, and this is where they typically start. They start with repositioning the sale. And folks, I'm telling you, this is not the way to do this. So, this is what this would sound like. And tell me when I read this, does this sound like somebody that really understands? So, you get an objection that says, hey, your price, it's higher than the other quotes I have. And you say, hey, Step, I understand. You know, many of my clients can appreciate the quality that we put into our work, so why don't we just look at the other proposals and see if we're comparing apples to apples? Well, what does this sound like? Sounds like you're trying to sell me, doesn't it? It doesn't really sound like you understand. It just sounds like you're trying to get my wallet or purse. And so what happens in many of these objections is that as soon as the client says, hey, you know what, your price is higher than the other quotes, if you respond this way, the deal's over, because the client is going to pick up, you know what, you really don't understand. And since you really don't understand, you have pretty bad breath. And since you have really bad breath, I think I'm going to go ahead and get you out of my office. Now that's kind of exaggerating a little bit, but isn't that what happens? Imagine you're on the other end and somebody says, hey, I understand, and then they try to reposition you. Well, you know what? There is two parts in front of what I'm getting ready to show you that simply works a lot better. And so I'm going to show you. So here is how I want to change this up. So here's the steps. If you're going to acknowledge, I'm going to show you how to use an either or statement. And then you're just going to check in. And checking in means you're simply going to ask them, is this correct? Or did I get that right? Then you're going to wait for their response. And then depending on how they respond, you may ask them to kind of explain or go a little deeper into that, or you're going to go into your position and respond. Okay? So the acknowledging of a customer objection is the key that I'm going to show you in this webinar. So when you were walking into Macy's, we talked about this, and you saw that clerk coming, there's a thinking associated with objections with create stories. Now, a lot of psychologists know this. They know that that a lot of times that we'll get a little bit of information, a little bit of fact, we'll see something, we don't really know what we see, we didn't really investigate it, but we'll take a little bit of information and we create a story out of that. That story creates an emotion, and that emotion determines how we act. We know objections are like that, because there's a thinking or a story associated with any objection. And so what are you thinking when I ask you your price? Let's say that you're the prospect and you're telling me, hey, Step, your price is a lot higher than the other quotes I have. Well, what would you be thinking? Well, you could be thinking a lot of different things, but the point is this, that you're thinking something. When you're walking into Macy's, what is it that you would be thinking? And here's a couple of things that people are thinking when they're walking into Macy's. See if you can relate to this. The first thing I would be thinking, or one of the things, is, hey, you know, you're going to waste my time. You're interrupting my schedule. I have something I want to go look at. I'm not really sure what it is. I'm just going to browse around, but I don't want you wasting my time. Another thing you could be thinking is, I already have a lot to do, so you'd be interrupting my schedule, which is the next one. Hey, you're interrupting my schedule. Or I don't want to spend any money here, or I don't want you to tell me how to spend any money or throw any sales at me. And that's the last one. You're just trying to sell me something here. Well, the point is this, is that any objection that comes your way, that particular individual is thinking about something. Does that make sense to you? So they're also creating feelings. So let's stay with me here. When you're handling customer objections, when you're creating an either or statement, the first thing is they're probably thinking something. The second thing is they are feeling something. There's a feeling associated with an objection. So what would you be feeling if you told a salesperson, hey, your price is higher than other quotes I have? Well, here are some things. You know, I could feel frustrated. I could feel like that maybe you're trying to pull one over me. I could maybe feel a little angry or frustrated or just annoyed that I have to go through this process, resentful, mad, irritated, offended, uptight. See, there is a feeling associated with every objection. So here's the key. What if we tied these two things together? Well, if we tied together what people are thinking and what people are feeling, and we put that in our statement right at the acknowledge and then the probe. So here is the amazing formula that works. I've seen this work and diffuse customers and almost turn them from prospects that aren't interested in meeting to prospects that really concede and say a meeting or go ahead and sign the deal or go ahead and agree to agreement. And it's simply because, you know what the key is? They see the person as a real person that is identifying for where they're at. So imagine if you said this: your price is higher than other quotes I have. And your acknowledgement would sound like that, like this: hey, you know what, Steph, I understand that you're concerned that our price is higher than the other quotes, and you're probably thinking that maybe we misquoted something and we're charging more for similar product, or feeling a little confused about what we're doing. Is that correct? So there's your structure. You want to acknowledge with I understand, but you need to tell them what is it that you understand. And what did you tell them? Well, maybe they're thinking this, and maybe they're feeling that, and that's correct. Then you can drop down after they've given you a response. And by the way, folks, here's the response you'll typically get. That's why you have to do two of these. You have to do one thinking and one feeling. Because if you do just one, I could just say, you know, that's not correct. But if you do one thinking and one feeling, one of those may be correct, and I'll say, you know, that's right. And I usually ask customers, well, can you share with me what's going on? Why is that correct? And here it is. First of all, they see you as a real person. That really proves that you acknowledge and understand the objection. And then once it takes probably, I've seen this done a lot when I teach it, it probably takes 10 seconds to respond like this. It'll take another couple of minutes for the customer to share with you. And as they're sharing with you what's going on, you know what they're doing? They're recalibrating how they think about you. And all of a sudden, hey, this guy doesn't have bad breath, or this girl doesn't have bad breath. They really are interested. I mean, this is a real person I'm talking to. So creating or handling objections using an either or statement is what works. So how about this? I want you to be putting your thinking caps on. And the objection is, hey, I don't have time to meet right now. Now, if you said that, what would you be thinking? Or what would you be feeling? So let's throw some things out there. So I don't have time to meet right now. Well, I could be thinking that you're calling me and I'm busy and you're interrupting my schedule. That's what I'm thinking. And I could be feeling a little annoyed that I have another salesperson calling me up trying to get on my schedule. And so what I would do as a salesperson, I would just connect those two together and say, hey, you're probably thinking this and feeling this, and I would come out with this statement right here. So I'd say, customer says, or prospect says, hey, you know what, Steph, I don't have time to meet right now. And I'd say, hey, you know what, Bob, I understand you don't have time, and you know, you're probably thinking that this is not what I need right now, or feeling a little annoyed, or that I interrupted your day. Is that correct? And folks, I have seen salespeople on the phone trying to book meetings. They get this. This is one of the number one objections that they get, and all of a sudden the customer goes, yeah, that's right, and then they go into a reposition. Well, the reason I'm calling, Bob, is just to schedule a meeting with you, just to sit down and talk about what you're doing and tell you about what we're doing and see if it makes sense to do business together. You know, they were going to say that anyways, but instead of saying, hey, I understand, you know, but, you know, I get that from a lot of customers. You know what? They didn't really acknowledge what the customer could be thinking or feeling. That's why this technique works all the time with probably every objection that I've seen. Hey, do you get this objection? Hey, I'm under contract right now. You know, work with a lot of people who do managed services or technical services or data services or things like that. And the person they're calling is already with a vendor and under contract. Of course, they haven't looked at that contract in a while, and they really don't know when it expires. I mean, I can tell you right now with my cell phone, I can't tell you when it expires, but I can tell you I'm under contract. So if you wanted to get a meeting with somebody who is already under contract, what would you be thinking if you got hit with this objection? What would you be feeling? Well, you know what I would be thinking? Is, why do I want to meet with you? Because I'm under contract, and if I break the contract, I'd have to pay termination fees. So why do I want to do that? And I'm feeling somewhat frustrated that you want to call me out of the blue and try to get on my calendar. Well, why don't you just tell them that? Because that's kind of what's out there. So what you're doing is you're taking the acknowledgement and you really acknowledge with them what it is that they're feeling or thinking. And so here's what it'd sound like. Hey, Step, I'm under contract. And I would say, hey, you know what, Bob, I appreciate that. You're under contract. You know, you're probably thinking that you don't want to pay termination fees by canceling a contract. You're feeling a little agitated that I called to talk about this. Is this correct? And folks, people generally will feel how genuine you are and that you really understand this is what my problem is. It may not be that I'm really under contract. It could be I just don't want to talk to you. So as soon as you diffuse this, now you have somewhere to go, and now you can go to the repositioning part, which is what you normally do in the first place. So let's look at a couple of more because our time is going to be up in a little bit. You ever get this one? Hey, we're all good here. You're calling, you're trying to get an appointment, you're trying to get somebody to listen to you, you're trying to break their preoccupation and get them interested in you and your products and your services. And you call up, maybe you're calling 50 people a day, you're leaving voicemails, you finally get a hold of somebody on the telephone. You go, hey, like my buddy Quan, who's actually doing he's the moderator here. Hey, Quan, you know, and he says, hey, we're all good here, Step. You know, what would he be thinking or what would he be feeling, you know, when I call out of the blue like that? Well, those are the things that as you look through these 32 objections, if you get my book, or you just take this PowerPoint, actually put these answers in here. But the objections that you get, you need to go ahead, sit down with somebody, and kind of map that out and ask yourself, what would I be thinking and what I'd be feeling? Now, a couple of things about this structure that I want to point out. You want to start off with what you are thinking. That's what you want to start off with. And then you want to go into what you're feeling. You want to do thinking first, feeling second. And there's a reason for that. First of all, as soon as you say, well, you're probably thinking this, all of a sudden, to the listening ear, I am going to hear what you think I'm thinking. And then I'm going to tie that into what do you think I'm feeling when you actually throw this particular either or statement out there. And folks, people, just the way they're listening, seem to react very positively when you do that, because it could be that what you told me I'm thinking isn't correct, but you could be spot on with what you would be feeling. And what you'd find as you use this technique, a lot of those feelings are very similar, except the person you're talking to hasn't heard it before. What they hear from other salespeople is what you're hearing, which is, hey, you know what, I understand, and they go right into positioning. So let's look at what this looks like here. Get this slide to switch for me. Here we go. So we're all good here. Whoop, did too many here. Hang on with me. That's a good one too that's too expensive. So, hey, we're all good here. And you could say, I appreciate that you're in a good place. And you're probably thinking, you know, I don't really have time for the salesperson. Or feeling a little frustrated that I called to interrupt your day. Is that correct? And how are they going to respond to that? Well, yeah, that is correct. What I like to do when I get to this point where I ask them if this is correct or am I right, you have to let them acknowledge. That's a probe to that 4 parts. So acknowledge, probe, reposition. Okay? Because what you'll hear is, yeah, let them talk about, you know, I've had, in fact, a guy I talked to the other day when I'm trying to make an appointment, he didn't know I was calling, didn't know who I am, and he said, I get this lot, hey, I'm all good here, we're already using somebody. And I threw this particular thinking, feeling, either or statement at. And I said, is that correct? He goes, you know what, Steph, that's exactly correct. And I said, well, could you talk to me about that? He went in, I mean, for a guy that actually is all good here and wanted to get off the phone, he spent another 10 minutes telling me what's going on in his organization. And then I repositioned that and said, well, you know what, why don't we go ahead and get together, because I know that you're currently using somebody, but if I had a better understanding of what you're currently doing, I think I may have a couple of things that they're not giving you that could be really important to you. So would you like to just visit and have a discussion about that? What do you think he said? Absolutely, sure. Now, why did he concede to meet with me when the first conversation was, I'm not meeting with you? Well, that's because when people see you as a real person and you really identify with them, you're going to find a lot more people are going to be open to hear you. And why is that? Well, because you heard them. You know, when you hear what people are really saying and you tap in, you can really empathize with them, you're going to find a lot more people are going to go your way. So here's another one. It's too expensive. So what would you be thinking or what would you be feeling if it's too expensive? Well, I know a couple of things that I would be thinking. You know, I don't have the budget for that. And so a counter would be, hey, I understand you believe that we're too expensive. You know, instead of, let me pause right, instead of going to repositioning what you're saying, go ahead and acknowledge with an either or statement. So you'd say you're probably thinking this will not fit into your current budget this year, or feeling somewhat under pressure since this is the solution you wanted. Is that correct? Do you see how that works? So when you handle a customer objection with an either or statement, you're going to find that you're going to get a lot more people that are actually going to spend more time with you in handling customer objections. So here's a couple of things as we wrap up. You know, what's the most effective way of handling an objection? Do you ask an open-ended question or respond with a value statement? And this is a question that a lot of sales trainers use when they're teaching this, you know, this type of class. And of course, open-ended questions to get more information before you deliver or reposition or create value is the answer to that. So the next one is, you know, what are some common objections that you hear through the closing process? So the question I have is, do you hear objections in the closing process? Well, absolutely. So you're going to hear the questions like we just talked about. It's too expensive. I'm going to have to pass this through management. I'm going to have to get another opinion. And so what are you going to say to that? Well, just use, hey, you know, I understand. And go into, you're probably thinking this, you're probably feeling this, is that correct? And watch what happens. There's another question there. It says, when is it most effective to respond with an open-ended question? Well, you know, when I find it more effective is after I do my either or statement and they say, yeah, that's correct, because you got to give them a chance to acknowledge what you said. And then you can go into, hey, can you explain that to me? Can you share that with me? And folks, take a little time to hear the concerns that they have, because they could be giving you a concern that you haven't heard yet that nobody's ever asked them. It's kind of covered up there. Now, if you're going to handle objections, you want to identify objections early in the sales process. So when during the sales process should you expect objections? Well, all through the sales process. You should be, and this is what I recommend as a sales coach, is write down the objections that you normally hear. And if you're kind of, maybe your brain is freezing a little bit, you can't think of it, get with some of your counterparts and say, what are the objections we hear? Write them up on a board. And then write out an either or statement. Type them up, put them in front of you, because those are the objections that you get. And here's what, folks, since you know you may hear that over and over, it'd be a lot easier to handle those objections with an either or statement when you practice them. So when's the best time to get objections? You know, I hear that a lot. You know what, if you knew that going into a proposal that you were going to get a price objection, then in your first meeting, what I recommend that you do is throw up a statement that is about to qualify that client. If you know your solution is going to cost $20,000, before you leave that first meeting to your proposal meeting, you may want to do a high-low statement, which is, you know, by the way, when I come back with the proposal is going to be between $10,000 and $20,000. Is that something that's going to fit into your budget? You know, as long as our proposal fits your needs and goals. And if they fall out of the chair, at least you know that you're way too high and you're going to have to do a little work to get them ready to accept that $20,000 proposal. But when is the best time to get objections? All the time. And if you expect they're coming, why don't you raise the issue up yourself? So in summary, here's what we want to focus on. Sales objections are just part of the job. If you are in sales, you want to learn this skill set, the either or statement, the 4 parts of handling an objection. You want to write it down because it is the least developed skill set in the sales world, in my opinion. You know, and I have spent thousands of hours with enterprise reps, consultative selling reps, business reps, independent reps, salespeople, or just teaching them how to handle negotiations and stuff like this. So they're just part of your job. There are many reasons prospects object, and you know, a lot of times they're not going to tell you. So you might as well just use an either or statement and say, is that correct? Because guess what? If you're way off, what are they going to do? They're going to tell you that you're not correct. And you can say, well, what is going on? You know, prospects don't want to be sold to. You don't want to be sold to. I don't want to be sold to. So you want to make sure that you're minimizing that bad breath problem. You know, when you want to expect sales objections because they're coming, you would acknowledge with either or statements. Just don't say I understand or I apologize or I'm sorry. But you want to put in, here's what you're probably thinking and feeling, and then pause, and then check in with them to see if that's correct. The other thing is you just want to practice. Nothing comes easy in the sales world, does it? There are a lot of people, a lot of competition out there, and those of us that actually become sales meeting ninjas in a sales meeting process, if you're interested in that, you can give me a call. If you want to go deeper in this, be sure to give me a call, but you want to be able to practice this. And if you're interested, you can go to Amazon.com and get the 32 Sales Objections Easily Countered book. If you want a author-signed copy, you can email me at step@stepsidner.com. I'd be happy to get you an author-signed copy for that. So I'm going to give this back to Qua, and he is going to wrap us up here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Step. Let's, before we wrap up, we do have a few minutes for Q&A. So at this time, I'd like to remind all the attendees that we can still take your questions. So feel free to type them in your question box. So let's kick it off here. Step, when you're in a sales meeting and handling objections from, your prospect, is it different when there's multiple people versus just one person that you're dealing with?
No, absolutely not. What's interesting, that I'm glad that you said that, Paul, because when you're in a meeting, you have several people. You may have several objections. You may have one person object, and then you fire back an either-or statement. And what happens is that if you don't use an either-or statement, you'll get somebody else that object, and it kind of adds different layers on. It's kind of like people are, building a case against you. But what happens to the listening audience, as soon as one person handles an objection well with the acknowledge probe using the either or statement, you can find that the other person softens up because they hear that you're a real person and that you're not saying you understand, you're demonstrating that you understand. And if they object, you can simply say, you know what, you're probably thinking the same thing too, and then throw that back out to them. So usually a couple of rounds of that seems to work pretty well.
Great tips. And in the reverse scenario, is it better to have more people with you, or does that just overwhelm the prospects?
When you go into a meeting, you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, well, if you go into a meeting and you have somebody with you, the best thing I can say is everybody needs to understand where they engage and disengage in the meeting. They also understand is who's going to handle these objections. And typically I coach organizations that if you're bringing a sales engineer or a manager or something like this, the sales account rep needs to be the one handling objections. The sales engineer or the sales manager can actually not acknowledge, but reposition that. And that's kind of where I coach teams. That's where you're going to jump in there, is that you acknowledge probe with an either or statement. You'll ask the customer, is this correct? And then the manager or the sales engineer can actually help to reposition and support that. And that's what I usually recommend.
Great tips there. Let's shift gears a little bit here. I really liked your tip of, saying that's why I'm here to an objection. In your experience, have you ever found that there's a scenario where that doesn't work?
Well, it doesn't work in every case. It's because what happens if you don't know what you're going to say after you say that's why I'm here, because you have to report back, well, why am I calling or why am I here? It kind of falls flat. And that would be in the case where if you're going to use that, you want to make sure that you're thinking pretty critically fast, because you need to come up with, this is why I'm calling. So if somebody said, hey, call me, you have a website that you're having, I said, hey, you know what, that's why I'm calling, then I better follow up with that with probably a repositioning. It doesn't work as well as the either or statement because it still sounds like you're trying to sell me, doesn't it? And anytime it sounds like you're still trying to sell me, you're going to have that arm wrestling match going on.
Okay, great advice there. Let's shift gears a little bit again. In terms of, handling the objections, I'm sure a lot of salespeople have notes and scenarios on what to say in what situation. Do you have any best practices on how to practice those statements without making it sound like you rehearsed it?
Yeah, the best thing to do is that I recommend is get with a sales coach or get with another peer and throw up some sales objections, put them on a card, put them on a flash thing that you can put on your phone, like the heads up game. And when that objection comes up, you're thinking, what am I thinking? What are you feeling? And then practice that. And what you find out is that, in my book, The 32 Sales Objections, those are common in the industry. But, people aren't going to get hit with those 32 objections. They may get hit with some of them, but not all of them. And so there's probably a cluster of objections that people get on a regular basis, and those are the ones that you really want to practice and become a skilled objection handler at.
Okay, great advice there. Let's wrap up with one final question here before we cut everyone loose. In your experience, Step, in handling objections, is there ever a phrase or a word in terms of objections that just cues you, to just cut loose, that there's no hope with this prospect?
Yeah, I love techniques and processes, but do they always work? Well, no, they don't always work. It's the kind of rule of thumb or best practice to do that. But you're going to run into some people that even if you give them an either or statement, they're just going to hang up on you. I don't know if it's a word or phrase or it's an attitude or behavior, but when that happens, what you're going to do is just brush it off. I call it misplaced aggression. They're not really mad at you or anything. It could be they had a really bad day. It could be your either or statement didn't connect with them. It could be that you did call and they're right in the middle of a meeting, and you just put them in a queue and try them back later on. But at the bottom, the bottom line is, if people say they're not interested and they tell you twice they're not interested, my advice is believe them and go ahead and put them back in the queue and call them later on. But don't keep pushing through something if people are just not interested. At best, you don't want to make an enemy out of them that you can't call them back later on, right?
Okay, great tips there. Lots to think about. So let's wrap up Q&A here, just to be aware of everyone's time, with a few final items. First of all, most importantly, thank you so much, Steph, for joining us today and sharing your content with the community. It was great to have you here today.
Yeah, great. I love being with you guys.
All right, thank you. And if you'd like to take Step's full course, please feel free to visit illumio.com and check out his course along with many of our other courses. And if you'd like an introduction to Step or would just like to learn more about the Illumio platform, please tell us on the post-event survey that will pop up right after I end today's webinar. And at this time, I'd like to thank everybody for taking an hour out of your day to learn with us here on Illumio. We hope to see you at future events and have a great rest of your day.